are. Okay, so what I have done here is compress probably about 6 hours into closer to, well, I guess it's almost 20 minutes. 20 minutes or so. So I'm tempted to make it even shorter, but it goes by really fast. So what I was doing was, for this sequence, even though the previous sequences have been done predominantly in OpenToonz, and frankly, after doing the first 1,000 frames of this anime, I sort of decided I really wasn't going to use Blender for inking, for a host of reasons that I'll probably recap to one degree or another here in this video. But basically, I decided I wasn't going to do it. Well, when I did this sequence, I thought, let's give Blender one more try. And the reason I did that is because the animation has a camera move baked into it, which I'm sure I'll play it back here somewhere along the line, and so you'll see that. But because it's got this camera move baked in, it just seemed like maybe it was going to be easier to do as much as possible right inside of Blender. And so you can see what I'm doing here is I actually thought I would try to do the painting directly in Blender using the grease pencil. And oh my gosh, that was a mistake. Now, when you watch it here played back fast, it looks pretty cool actually, and it looks like it might be fun to do. But trust me, it was not fun. Trying to get the lines and the colors to all line up properly, because you can't really do a flood fill, obviously, in Blender 2.79 grease pencil. So what you have to do is essentially draw shapes on a separate layer for your color, and then kind of make them line up as much as possible with your ink lines. Either that or completely redo your ink lines with a Blender grease pencil color that has, an opaque color baked into it. So, and that is a legitimate way to do it. And then obviously the ability to use the sculpting tools, which you can see here, I did use the sculpting tools quite a lot. But see, like there, what I'm doing is I'm just drawing the shapes and then going in and fine-tuning them, making sure things line up properly. And every once in a while I sort of paint myself into a corner and had to retreat. Well, the long and the short of the short, boy, that didn't come out right. The long and the short of the story is that I got really not very far into it before I decided that doing the color and the painting in the grease pencil was not going to be, that was going to be really tough. I decided that's a bad idea. So I rendered it all out of Blender, and then I brought it into Krita for, quick and dirty paint work. Now you can see what I did was I actually took a screenshot of the palette from OpenToonz, from the shots I did earlier, and just dragged that into Krita so I could use the eyedropper to select the right colors. Okay. So this looked moderately hopeful as a workflow, but I knew I was bumping into some trouble here right out of the gate because I had rendered it with the 3D vase baked in, and I had also rendered it with the background lines for that delineate where the window is that these guys are crawling through. So I knew there was a chance I was going to have to re-render it, but I figured I'd just go through the process of doing some of the fill work in Krita just to kind of see how that's going to go. And ultimately, I did re-render it out of Blender because I decided I really didn't want the 3D vase to be in the shot. I didn't want Akari to be in the shot either, actually. So I made this list of things I wanted to change before I re-rendered. Like getting rid of the background lines and then drawing some new lines to make sure that we had closed shapes so that you could fill them easily in Krita. Some people actually call it Krita, by the way. I'm not really sure what's technically correct. I've always called it Krita. So then I went through, and in the process of doing that, I just cleaned up, I'm trying to clean up my art here so that the most important thing being that we have closed shapes. If you're going to try to do flood fills, you got to have closed shapes, obviously. So for that reason, I wanted to kind of just go in and double check things. And what I learned, unfortunately, is that, and you'll see this as we go along here, again, at this speed, this would be a quarter of a quarter. So this would be slowed down to 1/16. Here I was demonstrating how easy it is to snap in Inkscape. Because if the Blender Grease Pencil had a snapping feature, it would solve so many problems. I mean, having the fill feature is cool in Blender 2.8, but it's not amazingly great. It's good, but it's not like amazing. Okay, so is there something else that would be just as an effective solution in terms of making the Blender Grease Pencil a viable all-around animation tool? Well, for me it would be snapping, because then at least you would know you have closed shapes, and then it would be, you can bring the image sequence into any program that can do flood filling and deal with your color. So it isn't really critical that the color be done in Blender. So I'm glad Blender 2.8 has the flood fill function, and I'm sure downstream here I'm going to spend more time with it. But at this point, if I had to, say, hey, what's the feature I'd like to see, it would definitely be snapping. So that because the problem is in Blender, if you don't zoom in really, really, really close, and I'm going to ask you to take my word for this because I found out the hard way. If you don't zoom in super close, you think you have closed shapes, and you don't. And then what happens is you bring it into Krita, or alternatively, of course, you could bring it into OpenToonz and turn it into a toonz raster level and do your filling there. But either way, what you would find happening is you click to fill in a shape with color, and the color bleeds out through the shape and fills up the whole screen because you were trying to flood fill a shape that is not, in fact, really closed. So that's the problem that I was trying to avoid here by zooming in quite a bit and sort of meticulously moving the points around. Now, me sitting here, as I look back and watch this, I have to say, it looks cool. If I saw someone else doing this video, I'd go, wow, this is a cool way to work. I like it. I like what you can do in the Blender Grease Pencil with doing ink lines. Don't let that be your takeaway. Don't let that be the lesson. That is not the lesson here. I actually am going to say that I will probably never, ever use the Blender Grease Pencil for inking again. Because on the one hand, I found out that basically OpenToonz does the job a lot better, but also this was so difficult. There were so many times that I went to fill shapes and it turned out they weren't closed shapes, that it really was no fun at all. Took all the fun out of it. Anything in the, even if it takes less time, actually, any procedure that basically ruins all the fun of doing this is kind of a non-starter for me. And the Blender Grease Pencil, as an inking tool, if I had to give one word to describe it, I would say hopeless. And the reason it's hopeless for me, and others may disagree, of course, but is that if you don't meticulously zoom in really close, not kind of close, you got to zoom in super close to really make sure that shapes are closed when you think they are, then you're going to find out when you go to flood fill that like half the shapes aren't closed, and it's just a real mess. Now there's some other things that present challenges when you render out an image sequence in Blender. Obviously every single frame is rendered, so theoretically every single frame has to be painted. Now the good thing in Krita is you can put your paint on a separate layer, so if nothing changes in the given frame, then you don't have to refill the next frame. You can just let it do effectively a hold until it's time to, until something moves in the frame and you need to redo the paint operation. But even so, I must say that this way of working, again, it really wasn't too fun. If I had it to do over again, this would be my workflow, and this I think is the takeaway from this process. The workflow that makes sense is to only use Blender for, well, obviously CGI if you have to do CGI, which in this case I did with the vase, but only use Blender for the pencil test or for the planning, for blocking in your animation, figuring out timing. It's great. You have an infinite canvas. If you want to do a camera move, you can do it. Although I mean, as a caveat, I would say that, again, if I was doing this scene over again, I would not do the camera move in Blender at all. I would choose a point of view and decide that, hey, this is the point of view from which my characters are going to be seen, and then I would bring them into OpenToonz and split them up into 3D and do the camera move there, actually. Because then it allows you to sort of like draw only one pose. Like for each character would be on their own level. You just draw each character, in many cases, just draw them one time, ink them, fill them, and then the camera move takes care of the animation, so you're not having to do flood filling on every single frame, you know. It's kind of like just the idea that why would you want to do it? Why would you want to have to fill 40 frames if you can fill just one? And with the right planning, you know, it's possible to only just have to fill not necessarily one, because the character may have to move, obviously, but at least you can do a lot less work. So when I was doing the first 1,000 frames of this anime, being that most of the work was in OpenToonz, it was basically fun. It was like things kind of work intuitively the way you'd expect them to work, working with the sub-X sheets, the ability to parent things, parent one layer to another, the ability to do post effects. Basically, although some of it is difficult and a little clunky and crash prone, frankly, you got to save your work frequently. But basically, you can, once you know it, you can sort of do what you want to do. This workflow with Blender and Krita really isn't like that. I find that you paint yourself into the corner a lot. One example would be, if you've got your shadows on a separate layer, what if character A, like right here, actually this is what happened, this character stops moving. So I really only want to paint his shadows one time, because if I have to paint it, I have to paint the shadows 10 times, the odds are that it's going to chatter, because I'm not going to paint the shadows exactly the same every time. But the problem is Krita wants to add a new keyframe because I need to add, because the other character keeps moving. So there, you know, the obvious solution is put each character's shadows on separate layers. Okay, if that's what you're thinking, I would say you're completely right. That is definitely the solution. But my point is that those kind of little gotchas, let's call them gotchas. My point is that you run into those kinds of gotchas a lot working with Blender and Krita trying to do 2D animation. So again, you can do it, and you'll see here as I get into the shadows, Krita's definitely cool for you know, for being able to block in the shadows and add details. But you know, having said that, it's not appreciably better than OpenToonz. It's pretty much, I would actually say it's probably worse, actually, because at least in OpenToonz you've got the option of using raster levels, vectors, or toonz raster levels. You can use the right tool for the job at hand. So, but in any case, because now you might ask yourself, well, why did I go ahead and see this through and do the ink and paint in Blender and Krita? The reason is because I'm so deep into it, and that because that camera move is baked into the scene or the shots, I figured let's go ahead and give this workflow one more try before officially saying, you know, never again. I am officially saying never again. As far as doing painting in Krita, that's fine. There's definitely plenty of applications for Krita in 2D animation. Even though it has some real limits. You can see here, it goes by so fast you can't really see it, but I literally was having to go in almost every single thing that I clicked. I had to go in and fix and patch. You know, you see me zooming in and patching stuff because otherwise it won't fill at all. It was very arduous. And that's why Blender as a inking tool is just, it's off the plate, man. It's off the the list of possibilities. I've given it so many tries, and I just can't seem to. Others may differ in their opinion, but I can't find a way to make it work that isn't